What is next for Jed Hoyer and the Chicago Cubs? It's been quiet after the Kyle Tucker trade, but we've got rumors. We'll talk Roki Sasaki, the luxury tax, more Seiya Suzuki rumors out there. What do they mean? Why are they happening? All that and more on today's episode of the CHGO Cubs podcast. This is the CHGO Cubs podcast. My name is Corey. I am joined, as always, by Brendan, and we are coming to you on this fine Friday, December 27th. I want to wish everybody a happy holidays. Hope you had a nice time with your family, alone, or whatever you were doing. I hope you had a nice week and have a nice new year and all of that. I'm happy to have Kyle Tucker, Brendan. It's feel like that's part of having a good new year, is just thinking about that. I'd like to have a little more though, and I think that's sort of what we'll talk about on this show. It's been a little quiet, as I said.
It's been a little quiet. I think the Roki Sasaki market might be not holding things back, but the teams that are interested in him and Jack Flaherty in the trade market, you do want to see where meetings are going, get a feel for his interest and the mutual interest. And the decision for him is likely going to happen, according to his agent, not until the middle of January at some point. Right. So although it feels somewhat far away, we're only about 3 weeks away from that decision. And then listen, pitchers and catchers report towards most of those guys sometimes towards the back end of January. Then the middle of February is going to be here right around the corner. So it's going to be here before you know it.
I don't know if I'm ready for it, but yeah, I do want to talk about all of that. I mean, at this point, a lot of just rumor, conjecture, and kind of trying to figure out what Jed Hoyer's next move is. I think anybody, talking about this team, covering this team, a fan of this team agrees that, kind of more to be done. You and I talked about some of the projections last week, and they're nice. They look better. I was looking at a chart yesterday of how much projected WAR each team has brought in, how much they've sent out, and the Cubs were near the top of that list.
Number 2 on that list.
Right. Who was number 1? Oakland, because
the Angels.
Yeah. Or the Angels.
Basically the same team.
Yeah. And so that's nice to see. Of course, also pairing that with the Brewers being near the bottom of that list with a lot of the talent that they've lost. So that's nice. But still looking at this roster and where we want this team to be, even short of our dream, sort of $400 million payroll scenario, still some work to be done. So what that work is remains to be seen, and whether Jed Hoyer does it remains to be seen. I know people were having a nice time with the, equity and capital article that our good friends over at Bleacher Nation wrote, I think on Thursday.
It's a kind way of saying a nice time.
Yeah.
Nice time. Everyone loves private equity investments and the ownership group dishing out minority stakes. They love that. They love that stuff, especially this time of year.
And hearing, discussions of whether the Cubs will even go over the luxury tax again because they were over last year. It's always everybody's favorite discussion, I think, Brendan.
Yeah. Well, the Kyle Tucker hype, it can only get you along for so many weeks and back to reality about discussing the luxury tax. We've discussed the luxury tax, I feel like, on the show at least once every 2 weeks for the past 8 years. Such is our life.
Well, yeah. And I understand, I think you and I try to have the mindset of, we've expressed our thoughts. They should be spending more money. I wish they acted like a big behemoth and threw their weight around, but there's, nuance to it, and this is how they're acting. So we end up talking about that first tier because it's often what the team appears to be using as at least some sort of hurdle to what they're doing and how they're operating this business. So it's a little frustrating to read at times. And it leaves a good bit of question, about how they're going to operate and what their goals are and all of that stuff. But, that's business. I don't know. I just kind of like, I don't want to say I gave up on that a long time ago, but
Well, it's so
it's
complex
hard.
with
Well, it's just
such
hard to like yell about how much money they spend all the time. Like, I
right.
wish they spent more. It's been true for like 10 years. So
Yeah, and it's all complex. The whole budget scenario and the equity stakes and the short term return on investment those investors need to see. It's very complex. Brett did a decent job on Bleacher Nation of breaking all that down, and even he pointed out we don't get all the details, and as fans we can be upset, and we are, but there's a huge degree of unknown in these discussions. But that being said, it is still a little unsettling when you have other groups having, I wouldn't say ulterior motives, but
just influence.
their
Yeah.
motives were like, okay, give me the money within the next 2 years. And sometimes in comparison to an owner, let's say like Steve Cohen, they play more of the longer game. And sometimes those longer game decisions end up being the most fruitful, but in the short term, it may be uncomfortable for a little bit. That being said, though, I mean, there was a report out of ESPN that the Cubs are likely not going to go over the 2025 luxury tax. They went over in 2024. They didn't go into the year over, but they did go over it. Whether that's accident or not is always a debate. But even a report like that, I wouldn't put past the Cubs if they're like this, ultra contender and surprising folks, and they're on pace for 95, 100 wins in the best case scenario. I can see them hitting those penalties again.
Yeah.
If that's what would require a big revenue gain for 2025. We'll see.
Yeah, I would sort of expect something similar. They position themselves close, and if they need to go over during the season, they leave themselves a little bit of space. But if they find themselves, I think that's what we have to hope as a fan base, is even if they'd like to avoid it, if they find themselves in a spot where they are really contending, they genuinely believe, hey, Matt Shaw is going to be the rookie of the year, PCA is blossoming, Kyle Tucker is Kyle Tuckering at Wrigley Field, like, we got to go get, this year,
this closer,
the
this
2025 version of 2016 Aroldis Chapman, and we need the money. Like, you have to hope that the willingness is there. And I feel like it will be. I mean, I don't know that we should immediately assume otherwise.
With the luxury tax penalties, you have a 30% overage if you go over this year versus what it was last year at 20%. So then they start escalating. 30 will be 50%, and then if you go really far over, I don't want to get into the fine minutia of luxury tax, but if you go really far over, then you're going to be losing draft pick value. They likely will not do that. So the concept of like draft pick value loss is just not going to be in the cards for them. In the cards for them, it's going to be slightly more escalating penalties. And even if they go over, let's say, by 5 million versus 8 million, that extra 10% is probably negligible in their thinking in terms of how much playoff revenue is going to come.
Yeah.
So I can see them going over, as you pointed out, if the player is available, that makes them, 15%, 20% more likely of having success and that revenue coming in.
We'll see. Always fun. That's what everybody likes to discuss on a Friday morning right after the holidays. Let's get into some luxury tax penalties.
The front office executives are, they're having cookies themselves. They're taking some time off as well. I don't know what Jed's doing. I imagine he's having some, some coffee right now, maybe reading the newspaper, maybe some pastries. He's enjoying his time off.
Yeah. Well, and it's been an interesting market, Brendan, to follow along with. We, I think unlike some of the other off seasons, we got the big fish out of the way relatively quickly in Juan Soto going to the Mets. That was a pretty streamlined process. But we sit here still with some other big fish in this market still out there, and it feels sort of slow. I mean, not that Pete Alonso is certainly not in the stratosphere of someone like Juan Soto, but it is a little surprising that it doesn't feel like there's more action or, more of an urgency, I suppose, for someone to bring him in, or someone like Corbin Burns. We're still waiting on that market, how all of this, and then you have someone like Sasaki, who so many teams are interested in. A smaller handful of teams have been granted that meeting in Los Angeles to kind of like really go into their full presentation, the Cubs being one of those teams that were invited to one of those meetings. And that's a situation where he's only able to sign for so much that you can't, I think as a front office, you must have to go off of how you feel that meeting goes. And once you have a seat at the table, because you can't just bully your way around with the money. And so that one's interesting because it would certainly affect the Cubs' plans. You'd need to be able to budget for the innings and how you're bringing this guy into the fold, but you can't put your off season on hold for something like that. And that just makes we're in an interesting spot. It feels like the off season has like slowed down to a degree. I would expect that to change, now with the holidays over and once we get past New Year's Eve, perhaps. But it just an interesting market so far. Like I said, with kind of the big fish moving quickly, but still some really good players being out there, and not just a ton of, I don't want to call it urgency, but it just doesn't feel like a lot is imminent for a good portion of these guys.
It doesn't, which is a contrast because Jesus Luzardo was traded to the Phillies. Walker Buehler went to the Red Sox. And those were the two guys you could easily see the Cubs targeting for unique reasons. With Buehler, is going to be the short-term contract, which you got 1 year, $21 million from Boston.
For Luzardo, surprised about that.
I know, it was a little surprising,
and
given those terms. I would have been okay with that too.
Again, with the Cubs' budget is weird,
right.
So I'd have to think about it. But like, I would have taken him on a 1 year deal,
right? And then you have Luzardo traded to the Phillies. He has 2 more years left. Back issues may have been a problem. Philly did give up a prospect with a higher ceiling than James Trianto's, around a 50-ish or so rated prospect by some standards. So those two guys, plus a slower moving market, is a little, I wouldn't say unsettling. It just makes for this weird purgatory type phase. That being said, you still have, Sasaki there. You still have Jack Flaherty there, who may be of interest. You want to get crazy, you still have Corbin Burns there, and you may have a trade market that is still existing in Seattle, although we've heard nothing about that for the past, I want to say, month now. But there's options there. I do think because they were not the ones to give that Buehler contract, my optimistic self would think, okay, well, maybe they are more seriously interested in a longer term type trade or signing, because they want to give those innings to someone who's part of the picture post 2025.
Yeah, we'll see. It's a weird spot because I think you have to trust the process, and especially with the way some of these off seasons have played out. You think back to even like the Marcus Stroman deal, and just looking at how other free agency situations have played out, especially over
Bellinger's
the last few years. Yeah, like I think you have to be okay being patient a little bit, but like once you make the trade for Kyle Tucker, you do the Bellinger thing. It's very easy to understand why. And this includes you and I, like this fan base is kind of like, come on, man, like finish it off, like finish the puzzle here. I think there's a lot of good options, but people are going to get uneasy. When Buehler came off the board,
you saw it a little bit already.
Yeah, Luzardo was traded. You get that sentiment from the fan base that it's like, okay, like checkbox, like who's left on this list? Like, where are we going here? Because like you said, those Mariners rumors like kind of dried up. I know there was like Pablo Lopez discussion, Sandy Alcantara discussion, aiming a little higher, a little loftier, paying a much heftier prospect price. Do the teams even want to trade those players, et cetera, et cetera? But yeah, like, you make it felt like the Tucker thing obviously is like okay, Jed Hoyer, like, welcome to the game. The Bellinger thing, we made sense of. I think if you were like kind of paying attention, like understanding where that comes from. And, now it's like, okay, but now what? Like we don't really know the direction here, and yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think there's plenty of options still available, but I understand where this sort of impatience comes from the fan base to kind of just like round this out. Like, what are we looking at? Because it's too easy, Brendan, for some folks, even that may understand the impetus of the Bellinger trade and like what the plan after that might hypothetically be, to kind of be sitting there going like, all right, you made this big trade, but then you traded a good player, got the money back, what now? Like, we're just sort of like sitting here waiting for that next move. I understand it. I try to be patient. Am I? I don't know.
Well, you're
Deep
doing a
down,
good job, I think. I think you're
am I?
doing a
I can
good job
pretend that
being
I am.
patient. Maybe you're just hiding it well.
Yeah.
But let's take our ad break here, come back, maybe talk about some of those pitchers we just mentioned and see what the market is looking like currently. With 2025 right around the corner, now is your chance to save big on your next vehicle. The model year-end sales event is going on right now at Ray Chevrolet. Head in today to shop their huge selection of new Chevy models with special model year-end prices. Right now, take 10 to 12% off MSRP on select new Chevy models, or shop over 125 of their vehicles priced under $20,000 as one of the top-selling Chevy dealers in the Midwest. You'll always be able to shop one of Chicagoland's largest Chevy inventories. Visit our partner this December at their location at Route 12 in Fox Lake or at raychevrolet.com. And if you've ever heard of Ray Chevrolet, then you've also heard of Ray's Price Promise. They're guaranteed to make your next vehicle more affordable than ever with no price changing, no add-ons, and no hidden fees ever. That means the incredible prices we're talking about now, you can expect to see them the very same day when you shop Ray Chevy in store or online. So shop the model year-end sales event all month long by visiting Ray Chevrolet in Fox Lake or raychevrolet.com. Blue Moon. Some beers can say they're brewed for baseball. Only Blue Moon is brewed by baseball. Beer and baseball, they just go together. And no beer goes better than the one that was literally born in a ballpark. We have Wrigley Field sports action coming up, Corey. We have a hockey game at Wrigley Field coming up. That reminded me, Wrigley Field is right around the corner in 3 to 4 months. Blue Moon, every time I see a blue moon, I think, baseball's right around the corner. Have a blue moon. Remind yourselves of those June, July, summer days. They just go great together. So bring the ballpark to you with Blue Moon Belgian style wheat ale. It's one of a kind every time. Get Blue Moon delivered by visiting get.bluemoonbeer.com/CHGO to see your delivery options. That's get.bluemoonbeer.com/CHGO. Blue Moon, made brighter. Celebrate responsibly. Blue Moon Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado.
All right, Brendan. I do want to ask you. I want to talk about some of these pitchers, but I do want to ask you, like, why do I have to keep waking up and reading about the Dodgers' interest in Seiya Suzuki? Can I be left alone for 5 minutes?
That has to be all like agent to writer speak, where it's like, you know what, put this out there. Let's try to put some public pressure on these baseball executives, because like you, it doesn't make much sense. You have Seiya on a very team-friendly deal for 2 more years, and he's projected to be a 3 to 4 win player, even as a DH. And he's been one of the top hitters over the league over the past like 2 years. So It is weird.
Yeah, and look, we read this stuff, from his agent about him not wanting to be a full-time DH and whatnot.
Which his agent has to do. He has to get the most value out of his player.
And I suppose, if we're actually taking this at face value, because it keeps coming up, like, I suppose there's a world where, the Dodgers have a ton of young pitchers and, have always had a nice surplus there. I can see them having things the Cubs want, but then you're back in the situation where it's like, well, now you've sent out way more offense than you've brought back in this offseason, and kind of pushed yourself to a point where, like, you've negated basically the addition of Kyle Tucker, which is like your big thing. So I just wouldn't, I don't think I would understand the point of that. Obviously there would be other offense you could find if you did this, but yeah, I tend to read this as the Dodgers would like Teoscar Hernandez to lower his price or sign a contract soon, and the Dodgers have asked John Heyman to float their interest in another right fielder. That's my guess. Just because, again, even taking it at face value and saying, okay, this rumor is real, which again, I agree with you. It does feel like sort of agents pushing things to happen behind the scenes. Like, that's just such a, we talk about Jed Hoyer needing to like thread a needle to make a lot of this work and restructure the roster and bump the projection, whatever. And trading for Kyle Tucker and figuring out a way to turn Christopher Morel basically into Kyle Tucker over the course of a year. Really nice president of baseball operations work from Jed Hoyer. Trading the guy who has been your best hitter for the last couple years and one of the better hitters in baseball over the last like calendar year of baseball, that makes your job really difficult in terms of like fixing your lineup. So I'm not sure I understand it. And as we said, like, I don't, who cares if he doesn't want to DH? Like, I don't care. Do you care? I'm sure he cares, and Joel Wolf, his agent, cares. But okay, great. Like, good for you. You know what I mean? Then you can leave in 2 years if you're so upset about it. But like, for now, like, just pump some tanks at Wrigley Field, and you'll be there's plenty of innings for people to play defense.
Well, that's
so
the point.
I understand that concern from him and the agent, and as far as his value and whatever. But like, that comment didn't read to me as like, oh yeah, this is like bubbling over. They have to trade Seiya Suzuki because he's so upset and whatever. Like, I don't read it that way at all. So this feels like agency speak to me. And like I said, sending out a guy who's been, what was Seiya last year? 130 something, 140 WRC plus.
Yeah.
Like, what's
number
the plan?
16 in the league.
What on earth would be the plan there to get your lineup back to? That just feels like Jed making his job very, very difficult. It's making one move to then have to make 2 or 3 or 4 more just to kind of like make sense of it all. I don't really think I would understand it, but the rumor keeps popping up, so that's why I'm addressing it.
And it's
like
not
one of
as
those
if
things
these
I
are...
thought we were like done with a week ago, but like, here we are on Friday morning. It's like, geez, we're doing this.
It's not as if it's two like local reporters too. It's John Heyman and Ken Rosenthal. So two of the biggest national beat guys. The idea of trading Seiya is hard to see working out for getting immediate value back. Just not even in a trade, but just acquiring a substitution in free agency. If you want to approach it with some serious context, which I don't think it is, given the rationale of even keeping Seiya, you pointed it out. It's the outfield depth. If you have an injury in right field or the corners, well, Seiya, although he had some very weird stretches of defense and missing fly balls, he's an athletic outfielder, and he did rate okay in 2022, or rather 2023, before some weirdness last year. He has depth, but if you want to approach it with some rationality, you want to get crazy, well, maybe they trade Seiya, and then you sign someone like Santander, who has more of a higher power output projection for similar AAV over 2, 3, 4 years. That's so difficult to line up perfectly. I doubt that ever happens. But that would be one of the reasons to do it. But then again, you look at his projections, Santander and Seiya's, they overlap. And Seiya's actually is a little bit higher, especially when considering the defensive value and the athleticism on the base paths that Seiya does bring. He's a faster than average guy. I don't see it happening. It is weird that it keeps coming up. You have to think it's coming up simply for teams to be pushed from their agents to sign, Teoscar Hernandez. That seems to be the likely motivation.
Look, it can also be pressure. Perhaps Joel Wolf is like, hey, just do me a favor, float this a few times because I want the Cubs to make sure that they know he's not thrilled about that, but maybe we don't need to like get into that directly. But also, even thinking that hypothetically, like, everybody involved said we have a great relationship. We talk to Jed all the time. He's very open with us. We, love playing in Chicago. So like, that doesn't even seem like reasonable based on what we seem to be reading. All I would say is it would be there's certainly a way to make it work, but it's, you're making one move to then have to make a few more chess moves just to make sense of the one move, which like not typically a great way to like go about anything in life. Like we have this, but let's get rid of it, and then we'll just do 3 or 4 other things to replace the thing we already had. It's like, well, why? That feels quite overcomplicated to end up in a similar spot. And I would just like, even if it was loosely real, like what a bummer that would be. Like you sign a guy, you bring him over from Japan, you finally get him like coming into his own and like really solidifying himself as the hitter you kind of dreamt of him being. And then what? You're going to trade him for, I don't know, Bobby Miller or something like that. Like, I don't know. That just would be quite a bummer, I think, as
Watch
someone
that
who's a
actually
big
be the
fan of
trade. You
Seiya.
just call it the trade, Bobby Miller, Seiya. So I bet you some fans like, you know what? I kind of like Bobby Miller. This kind of makes a little bit of sense. Bobby Miller signed Santander. I could see this actually working out. But I to your point, it would be surprising because not only has Seiya been a productive hitter, we know the ceiling's higher with him, and in fact, he hasn't reached that peak offensive value. His splits sometimes don't make sense, where the strikeout rate is 27%, which is worse than league average by about 3 percentage points. But his contact rate is better than league average by about 2 to 3 percentage points. So what that means is over time, you would imagine that to even out, where the strikeout rate goes down to, let's say, 24, 25%, more batted balls, more fly balls, more home runs. And with his athleticism, the underlying bat speed, the swing length, everything points to more offensive output than he's even shown. So we've seen a 365 weighted on base average with a 280 batting average and only 21 home runs. Well, you can imagine that batting average stays similar, more batted balls in play, more base hits, more extra base hits, a higher weighted on base average. So you can easily see that play out. And I'm sure that's part of the calculus too. But for me, just to wrap up the whole Seiya discussion, depth, outfield depth. We have PCA in center field, his first full year being slotted in as the guy. Ian Happ, we know, a consistent approach in left field. Kyle Tucker, similarly consistent guy in right field, of course. But to have that outfield reserve would be mentally nice for me. The current reserves right now are Alcantara, which is actually kind of nice to have as depth pieces, where you have now a roster spot ironed out for guys who need at bats. Also, you have, Canario, for instance, if you want to give him more at bats. Owen Casey to give them more at bats. But still, those 3 guys, those younger guys, do have significant inexperience that is difficult to project. So if there's an injury in one of the corners, having Seiya fill in defensively actually would be nice. And then you can selectively play matchups at DH in addition to just those 3 outfielders, Alcantara, Casey, and Canario, in the form of other prospects who don't play the outfield. So there's value in that. I would not read too much into it, but doesn't mean they're not listening. If there's a package where they're like, oh, man, how can I turn that down? And you're parallelizing that trade with another significant acquisition, well, then of course you have to listen. But the chances that happen have to be 1%. Doesn't mean you don't listen or expend effort, but the probability of that happening has to be significantly low.
Yeah, I agree with that last part too. Like there's always like I'm not at all suggesting there's nothing the Dodgers could offer if they want him that bad. Like there's certainly things you could ask for if you were
send
Jed.
over Yamamoto. We'll do Yamamoto.
Yeah. Like there's certainly things you could ask for that would be worth Seiya or worth doing that. But it just in terms of how it all squares with making the team better for 2025 and putting your organization in a better situation, it's always just very difficult to do that if you're sending out the guy who was your best hitter the year before on a nice contract and someone who's only been getting better as he's continued to play in this league and at this level. It's not to say it couldn't happen and that there's nothing, of course, of all teams, the Dodgers would have plenty that the Cubs would value and that you could make sense of. But that it just would be it's a lot of moves to get to where you want to be. So I tend to think, yeah, this is just agency stuff, and I would be bummed about it. Look, is it possible if they want him bad enough, and this is all real smoke, and maybe Sasaki is going to LA, and LA wants to build this super team of guys from Japan and just absolutely corner that market and be this world kind of super team that's being broadcast and cashing in on all that. Maybe that's actually what's happening here, but that just feels very complicated for Jed to execute and make this team better. And I would like to see, in whatever order Craig Counsell decides to deploy them in, whether that's Kyle Tucker hitting second so that he's getting as many at bats as possible, or hitting fourth. I don't know. I would like to see those two greeting each other at home plate at beautiful historic Wrigley Field a lot.
Yes.
Maybe even so much they develop some kind of handshake or, little thing that they do when the one of them homers in the other one and they get to celebrate at home plate. That's what I want. That's the vision that I've had since they traded for Kyle Tucker. So I'm not willing nonstop. I'm not willing to waver off that. But yeah, look, like whether it's real smoke or agency stuff, I did want to talk about it because it keeps coming up. We keep hearing it, and that's not to say that we have to give weight, every time one of these national reporters reports on stuff, because if we did, we'd be doing a lot of water carrying for the agents, because that's what a lot of this is. But it keeps coming up. It keeps coming up in different iterations and over time. So I suppose we don't have to keep talking about it, but we kind of have to keep talking about it until something else happens. So let's take our second ad break here, and then we'll come back and talk about some of the pitchers that are left. Get Brendan's thoughts on maybe how the Cubs can beef up this rotation and what they might be looking at in some of these individual guys here.
We are sponsored by Chicago Sports Network, the new home of the Blackhawks, Bulls, and White Sox. CHSN will broadcast more than 300 live games per year across the Blackhawks, Bulls, and White Sox, and will feature a full lineup of original Chicago-focused sports content. They're also Chicago-based, Chicago-built, and Chicago to the core, and they're bringing it to every corner of Chicago across our 77 neighborhoods and beyond. At CHSN, Chicago comes first, so visit chsn.com for more info on how to watch the Bulls, Hawks, and Sox games all season long. ComEd can help businesses save money by becoming more energy efficient, Corey.
I didn't know ComEd did that, Brendan.
Yep. The Energy Efficient program can help find up to 35% in energy savings.
Wow. So what does a business have to do?
Just sign up for a free facility assessment at ComEd.com/biz.
So, Brendan, why aren't more businesses doing this?
Maybe they forgot the website?
Oh, well, I think it's ComEd.com/biz. ComEd.com/biz. ComEd.com/biz.
That should do it, I think. Legal conditions do apply. Offers are subject to change. Actual savings will vary by customers' energy usage and rate. The ComEd Energy Efficiency Program is funded in compliance with state law.
All right, Brendan. Let's talk pitchers, I suppose. If you had your pick of the litter, and that includes, guys that maybe are loosely available in trades, maybe it includes guys like Dustin May from the Dodgers that you could acquire for Seiya Suzuki if you were feeling the need to do that.
And Bobby Miller, both.
Like, how do you want the Cubs to finish off this offseason? Do you think they've been connected to so much pitching? Carter talked about it. Jed talked about it. We get the sense that they're going to continue adding there, but it's been a little quiet for the last, week or so in comparison to maybe a few weeks ago where we were reading, they're pushing Luzardo across the line, all this other stuff. Where do you see them going? Do you have a preference? And then I do want to ask you, I don't know if we've talked so much about Roki Sasaki. Obviously, that's a situation where Jed, they make their presentation and he gets to choose, and there's not much else you can do about that. But is that your, the pipe dream? What makes him so good? Is that worth all of the hype that we're putting around it? What do you want them to do about the starting pitching and the rotation here?
To set the stage right now, they are currently projected to have significant innings from about 7 starting pitchers. So if you look at their current allotment, if you will, they have Shota projected at 180 innings, Justin Steele at 170, Jameson Taillon at 168, Javi Assad at 140, which I believe personally that might be a little bit high given some of the fatigue and some of the injuries he showed at the course of last season. Although last year, he pitched the most innings of his career at 147, but can you do that again for a consecutive year? Might be a question by the front office. And then you look at the back end, then you have Matthew Boyd, who was signed recently, 133 innings projection, and then Jordan Wicks at 78 and Ben Brown at 27. So that makes up 7 starting pitchers. The error or the potential breaking points in that rotation are Assad, Boyd, Wicks, and Brown. Assad is that sophomore fatigue, the accumulation of innings. Boyd is, he only pitched 39 innings last season in the starting rotation. Can he even be accounted for 24 to 25 starts? Jordan Wicks had a significant injury last year. Ben Brown has a neck complication that might pop up considering how rare it is. My preferred path forward is eating innings. How do we get a pitcher that is likely going to slot in for, if given the opportunity, 24 starts? How do we get 24 starts on paper? And so the options right now, as you laid out, could be Jack Flaherty, could be Sasaki, could be a trade candidate, could be, if we revisit the Mariners discussions, Luis Castillo. If we get excited and more prospect willing to trade, it could be Pablo Lopez. It could be someone we're not even talking about. But I believe those 4 guys are probably the most rationale for eating innings, right? They may go a different direction and take more risk. My path forward, I don't know how it's going to work out given that Seattle wanted middle infield value, but I still believe that Luis Castillo would make the most sense. The reason for that is the diverse pitch mix, 4 pitch types. It's the high velocity. So he's still averaging 96. It's the 21 million AAV over 3 years. And it's just the consistency of his profile. 30 starts, 30 starts, 30 starts. So when I look at the value you have to give up in prospects, I believe versus Pablo Lopez, that's going to require more prospects. He's cheaper, 18 million annual average value. He's younger than Castillo, 28 years old, Pablo Lopez is. And unlike Luis Castillo, he's had recently, a 4 ERA. So even though he has a 10K per nine and a 2 based on ball per nine, there's still some wiggle room in there in projecting him as just an average pitcher that can still start 30 times. So the lower prospect price plus the greater degree of projection, given that he's had more of a base with Castillo, I think that kind of makes more sense. And I know there's concern about the age for Castillo and the 33 years of age and all of that, but 3 years for a $63 million contract remaining, plus a lower cost in prospects makes more sense to me. Then again, you have people say, oh, well, just go sign Jack Flaherty. Just go sign Flaherty. If the reports or the projections of him with a 5-year, $115 million contract is true, to me, 5 years for Jack Flaherty is a little unsettling. I think it's difficult to project Flaherty post 2026, given some of the recent arm concerns. And that was one reason why the Yankees decided not to trade for him due to some surprising medicals. If, though, Flaherty is achievable for a 2 to 3 year deal, then I would maybe consider that even over Castillo. But I'm operating under the assumption that a longer term contract, 4 years, 5 years for Flaherty, is what he's going to get. But the market's shrinking. And maybe that ends up not happening. And you get this Bellinger situation where it's a 2-year deal and a player option for a 3rd year, or these, complicated vesting type situations and opt-outs. In pecking order, if it's Flaherty for 2 years, 3 years, I would retain the prospects, use that for a different package in a trade. If it's Flaherty for 4 or 5 years, I would use those prospects, try to revisit the Castillo situation. Unlikely, given they want major league value back, maybe in Nico. If we're going to get crazy, I would consider going to Minnesota, but that's going to require an uncomfortable amount of prospects. And then, fourth, I'm praying that we get Sasaki, and I'm sure everyone else is as well, given he's going to be the cheapest option and the one with the highest ceiling. Then you can explore different trade candidates if those 4 targets don't end up happening for this team.
Well, and if Sasaki did choose the Cubs, where would you be slotting him in? Where would that fit in the projections and everything? Where does he land in that rotation? What does the rotation look like? If the news dropped that the Cubs got him, what would people be getting if they're only familiar with, hey, I've heard this name, I guess he's a big deal?
You slot him in towards the back end of the rotation to start. Probably substitute innings from Assad. See what Assad's role is, becomes more of a flex swingman as he was in 2023. And you hope he reaches his peak ceiling right away. His pitch types are very unique. I don't have graphs to show them here. It's going to be a little bit too complicated. I know. Okay, we'll get the graphs during the new year.
And I do feel like, you should only be providing graphs. They should be in the fold. Why would you put out your wonderful graphs for a guy who's not, if Roki Sasaki wants Brendan to make graphs about him, you got to put pen to paper, dude.
Listen,
you got to be a 1060 West Addison, my friend.
Fine. If they want to call me in for the Sasaki meeting, the second meeting, I'm available. Fly me out to Chicago. They're meeting in LA. I'll drive up. I got no problem doing that.
I think we could have both of us. Yeah. You do a little pitching presentation. I'm the season ticket holder representative,
I like that. They can put us at a bench. We can do a little 15-minute segment together too. That's how we
I don't know what all I would be providing. I'd show up, maybe eat a hot dog, and leave.
Well, you're like the staple fan. This is what you're missing, Sasaki. Look how nice Corey Freeman is over here, just chilling with this hot dog.
Do some sample clapping. Here's what it might sound like.
Maybe just show him some memes as well. It's like, listen, man, I do some pretty sick memes. This is what I could do for you. You have one good outing. Look what I can do for you.
And then, after this presentation, Roki looks at his agent and just goes, "What? What? Why did you bring me here?"
I thought they did a better presentation for John Lester. I heard there was some virtual reality. They got these 2 schmucks over here.
Yeah. Get the Dodgers on the phone. I'm out of here.
Yeah. But if you look at like what Sasaki throws, so he has a pitch base of 3 pitches, and the interesting thing with him is his fastball has a lot of run. So Lance Brostowski was talking about this, and he made the good point that the data between like MPB and MLB is hard to like scale appropriately because you have different baseballs in MPB. He did pitch in a World Baseball Classic, and when he did that, he averaged 100 miles per hour with his fastball. And then he averaged, this is going to get a little, nerdy, but just, bear with me. He averaged about 16 to 17 inches of induced vertical break. So the average is around 15 inches. What that means is he has a little bit more carry for his fastball. Okay. So carry plus 100 miles per hour, that's what you want, right? Now, the unique feature about those traits in addition is that he has more run on his fastball, and run means just tailing action. And so the average run for someone with a 16-inch vertical break fastball, it's about 7 inches, about 6 to 7 inches. With Sasaki in the World Baseball Classic, he showed about 10 inches. So that means more running action, slightly more carry at 100 miles per hour. I mean, that's a unique pitch type that you just don't see. So for any pitcher that has that much run, you typically don't see that amount of carry, nor do you see that amount of velocity. So I did put those numbers into like the pitch sibling predictor, and the computer has a problem finding similar pitchers. The one guy was like former Cubs prospect Pierce Johnson, because Pierce Johnson throws, like 15 inches of vertical break plus 10 inches of horizontal, 95 miles per hour. But it's so different because you have a 4 mile per hour velocity gap and still differences in that horizontal break. What also Lance pointed out is that something happened in his pitch shape between 2023 and 2024. Maybe it was arm related. He did have some arm fatigue issues, and he was his manager in Japan was discussing that there were some challenges in him in 2024 with that. So there may be some arm related growing pains, if you will, that a team has to account for. That's a unique four seam fastball. And then quickly on the other two pitch types, the splitter that he has, weird looking pitch, crazy looking pitch. So it's called a bullet splitter. Okay. If you go to YouTube, you type in Sasaki splitter, it looks like this, like weird shaken looking pitch, has like no spin on it. And so with this splitter, if you imagine Mark Leiter's splitter, it had a lot of like kind of like run to it, right? So kind of looked like a Greg Maddux type, change up, not to that degree, but it just ran away to left-handed batters. That's why for Leiter, he was so good. For Sasaki, that movement has basically 0 inches of horizontal and 0 inches of vertical. So that thing is thrown, gravity takes over, and that pitch just goes straight down. And if you plot that pitch on just, a pitch plot with like an x-axis and y-axis of movement, it literally looks like it just kind of cuts a little bit. So his four-seam fastball is a ton of run, and then his splitter just dives straight down. You don't see that for splitters. Most splitters have way more run on that, especially for someone who has a fastball with natural running action. So he has this unique horizontal separation from his four-seam and his splitter that you just do not see. And that's his standout trait. He's going to enter the league with this horizontal break difference that no pitcher has. Throwing 99 miles per hour with like an 88 and 90 per hour bullet type splitter. It's crazy. Now, what also makes him especially more appealing is that some Japanese pitchers, they come over and they have that two pitch dominant repertoire where you have a splitter, changeup, fastball type situation. Sasaki has a slider. So the slider actually moves at around 9 inches of horizontal, which is about 3 inches more than your league average, at 85 miles per hour, I believe is what the velocity was. So that allows him to attack right-handed batters with a pitch that moves away from their at-bats. 3 pitch types, moldable, very unique features, slider even grades, pretty well. You can mold it to fit your shape. And if there's a recent precedence of a pitcher having a breaking pitch, a slider, but that fastball splitter dominant pitch type, it's Shota. So Shota came over from Japan, had the off-speed pitch, had the fastball. They changed the location of the fastball. Boom, whips go up. They have the splitter played just as you expected. And then he threw in a breaking lateral pitch every now and then, and it helped him get left-handed batters out. And so my pitch to Sasaki would be, hey, we just did the same thing with Shota, where he also had a slider, and he also had this two-pitch dominant type mix. And look what we did to his fastball. We made his fastball even better. Look what we did to his off-speed pitch. We maximized his usage. And by the way, look what we did to his slider. Tommy Hotovy, get over here, show him the pitch, show them what you did with that multiple breaking pitch. And even Tommy Hotovy said that when they first signed him. That's the pitch, I think. And that's what Sasaki's looking for. Someone to help them push his development forward and be privy to his future long-term plans. That way, 4 or 5 years from now, he's making $350 million, just like Yamamoto made.
Yeah. And, obviously I think key detail here is the age and the price. This is different than some of these other situations.
The minor league contract.
Right. For a 23-year-old, Shota came over, he was 30. Shota 31 now. Like, this is someone who's coming over, like, really going to have a chance to like grow and develop in this league in Major League Baseball versus, having a pretty solidified career already before coming over and, hoping to have success here for a handful of years or whatever it might be. So it's a very interesting situation. It'll be, I don't know, disappointing, obviously, but if it, the thought all along has been the Dodgers, just obviously everything we already know about them. He grew up, and it has been a very big Shohei Ohtani fan. And, so it seemed like a foregone conclusion. It'll be not just if the Cubs lost out, but just sort of disappointing if that ends up being like, oh, okay, everybody was right. This wasn't really like, was it really even an open contest, or was this all sort of just for show to get us to ultimately him landing with the Dodgers anyway? But it's nice that the Cubs have a seat at the table. Not everybody got a seat at the table, so that at least reflects something. The Cubs clearly have a level of influence or interest, from folks coming over, and that's good.
Well, they're acquiring.
If we can read into anything.
The Cubs' reputation from their pitching side, their infrastructure, I imagine league-wide it's been growing. The reason, Craig Breslow, right? Breslow just got hired to lead the Boston Red Sox, and he was the principal architect of that growing infrastructure for the Cubs for many years at the pitching side. You look at who they just signed for their development from the lead guy at Tread Athletics, right? So they have a recent ability to attract pitching development talent. And they have also a recent history of showing that you can take guys whose careers are on the fringe and bring about the most from them. And now they have a recent history of doing the exact same to Shota Imanaga, who was valued lower by the league. That's why the Cubs were able to get him for that team-friendly price. And so I think that's a selling point. And I know we've heard all about, Sasaki, and he wants to play for a smaller market and he wants to play for a winner. Selfishly, if I'm Sasaki, the first question I ask is, how am I going to make the most money 4 to 5 years from now? And that means, how am I going to be the best pitcher in 4 to 5 years? That's criteria number one. And if there's a pitch from a team that stands out, that's going to be the driving force. The Cubs have to compete with the other pitching infrastructures. Now, if I'm the Cubs, I'm hammering down the Dodgers. Look at all those injuries.
Oh, I was just going to say that. Oh, yeah.
Bobby Miller.
Yeah.
Dustin May. Tyler Glasnow. Look, they just gave $150 million to Tyler Glasnow. He hurt himself. Did you see that World Series? No one pitched. Hurt. The only reason they were able to win the World Series is because they had to trade for Jack Flaherty because all their prospects were injured. We don't have that issue. Our pitchers, they had a neck issue. Don't worry about that. Look what we did for Shota Imanaga. Look what we did for Justin Steele's career. Look what we just did for Jameson Taillon. We don't have those issues whatsoever. So that would be like the selling point if you want to contrast the injury side. But then again, you still have Kate Horton's injury, Jordan Wick's injury, just uniquely different. No Tommy John's though, although Adbray Alzolay did get Tommy John. So just flip this part out.
I do think the Dodgers arm stuff would be, if I were, receiving these presentations, that is a worthwhile note.
Yeah.
Whether it's something that, Sasaki and his camp coming over are concerned about or feel like they would be susceptible to, that's kind of a separate issue. I can imagine each player individually sort of feeling like, I'm my own person. I have my own routines and ways I take care of my body. Like I'm either not concerned about that, or, maybe certain players would be like, yeah, hey, a lot of guys are getting hurt over there. I don't know how comfortable I am there. Here's one
last note though, before you move on, because it's really important. So then the Seattle connection gets brought up, right? So you see Seattle's rotation full of young arms, massive success. Seattle is currently looking for a head pitching coordinator. So that's fine, right? But again, we're trying to contrast existing infrastructures and plans in place. So from my end, if I'm a player and an agent and I hear that the team is pitching me this vision, but they're currently looking for a head coordinator, that to me suggests that the infrastructure is not finely tuned in place right now, which means I want to go to something that's established. So the Cubs on the surface, because they're not looking for, at least as far as we know, that head coordinator, then it seems to be more input and more established at this point. So that could be one contrasting point between those two organizations, despite the Mariners having that high number of successful pitchers.
Well, we're fine. Roki goes to Seattle. Seattle needs to clear up some innings and give the Cubs one of those guys.
There you go. I like that idea.
We can make a lot of things work. Or, conspiracy level. And I suppose this could go either way, but Dodgers floating these Seiya rumors because they feel like they're losing Roki to the Cubs, and they want them concerned that they're going to trade, one of their other Japanese stars.
So what I'm hearing right now, I've already convinced myself we're getting Sasaki. I've already convinced myself. I built it up. We're ready to go.
But I have I have definitely not convinced myself of that. I'm not.
Can I be honest with you though? I have started to believe it's more likely. I'm not saying it is likely, but over the past few weeks, I've started. I think
it's certainly possible, but I don't know. I mean, if I were a player coming over now, I did read from the agent about maybe wanting a smaller market or wanting a situation that won't be adverse for his mental health. And I can certainly see, obviously, right now. LA, it's the biggest market. They're going to have the highest expectations. I think if you were to join, they obviously are going to want to market that as, we've got Shohei, we've got Yamamoto, we've got Roki. This is our, three-headed monster in the rotation. And we're going to, absolutely just corner this market in Japan and, et cetera. That would be a lot of pressure. If you're the guy in that group that isn't living up to those expectations, like that is certainly, a potentially not pleasant situation to deal with. But let's be honest, right? Like if you were a 23-year-old coming over from Japan, you have the opportunity to play for a team that just won the World Series. They're spending $500 million a year. They have your idol like playing DH and pitching. I don't know, man. Why wouldn't you just go play for the Dodgers? It's nice. I think the Cubs have a shot. They have a seat at the table. And I wasn't, no joke. Like it may end up being a participation trophy, but the fact that the Cubs are viewed as a team worthy of getting a seat at the table and even participating in these things, it does matter. And we've talked about that, Shota choosing the Cubs, Seiya choosing the Cubs, other free agents in the past. You mentioned John Lester. Like it matters that the organization has a reputation and the ability to attract this interest. There are plenty of teams in this league that are, whether it's happening openly or not, they're being scoffed at, if they were to make offers at some of these players. Like the answer is, unless you're paying me way more than anybody else, absolutely not. Like I'm not interested. Like this is never happening. But
you look at the Philadelphia Phillies did not get a meeting.
Right.
They submitted their pitch. Big market.
Yeah.
So last 3 years,
it does matter. Is it a participation trophy? In some races, it might end up being that way. In the Sasaki race, it might end up being that way. But it does matter in the long run that they're at least viewed as a contender and someone, warranting a seat at the table. But I don't know, man. If I was a 23-year-old, I would sign with the Dodgers. Like not me personally, because I hate them, but in a vacuum,
I would sign with.
It just sounds like a really nice situation, and you don't have to play April baseball in Chicago. So
yeah. Well, if we're going to talk about that and the whole lifestyle, I would, sign with the Padres. I'd get a nice La Jolla mansion.
Go play with Yu Darvish. Yeah.
Go play with your boy Yu Darvish. Yeah. Petco Park's beautiful. Don't just sit in that traffic. You go to La Jolla Shore Drive. Have yourself a nice dinner.
Right,
go watch
don't
the surfing.
Make the pitch too clear. He might be watching. Like we don't want him to go to LA, but you're making a compelling argument.
But here's the thing: we're talking about cold weather. Let me tell you. San Diego's cold, and it's cold during the summer too. Okay, you're worried about the shivering thing. You walk outside in July in the evening, you're freezing. You walk outside in the evening in Chicago, you got what they call the cicadas. The cicadas, they're buzzing. It's like 75 degrees. It's a nice summer night in Chicago.
Yeah. We'll see. I mean, it would obviously be. I think the conclusion here as we wrap up, like. It's a great opportunity. If the Cubs were able to land that, it would be unbelievable news. It would be really exciting for this rotation, not just for 2025, but just the longer term potential there. But kind of out of their hands. They make their pitch, and, again, we'll see if this is the type of thing that there really was a chance for everybody and all the pitches were kind of equal, and see what wins out. Or, maybe this was, a bit of a show just to ultimately, land in the situation that everybody thought. We'll see.
No, I'm convincing myself it's going to happen.
Okay. You and Cody. Go ahead. Yeah. Ready to be heard again. So I think that's all we have for you. Hoping a little more action here soon. Because at this point it is a lot of rumor and conjecture. But Cubs have some work to do. They're in a better position than they started the offseason, but definitely still some work to do. And we'll see how they go about it. And we'll see where they position themselves. As you said, as we head toward the new year here, you start flipping the calendar. We're closer to pitchers and catchers reporting and things kind of getting underway. So we've got a good bit of offseason run left, but kind of got to be putting together that roster here, having a clear picture of what this 2025 Cubs teams looks like pretty soon here. So here's hoping Jed, has a plan and he's able to execute that. And we're all happy and looking at a, 91 win projected team or something like that, shortly here. So we'll see what happens. As always, CHGO Cubs team will have you covered if we need to do an emergency show, break news, anything like that. Check out allchgo.com, Twitter feeds, everything. Keep you updated and up to speed. Follow CHGO Sports on YouTube in case those breaking shows do happen. Brendan and I will talk to you again next week. And as always, go Cubs.
We all silly like the mayor.